Good afternoon to all of you. And topic of presentation is pulmonary medicine in liver disease and cirrhosis, what everyone should know. So, outline of presentation would be brief introduction, and then I will cover three major specific diseases which are specific for chronic liver disease, and then conclude. So, pulmonary complications in chronic liver disease. The association of chronic liver diseases with respiratory symptoms and hypoxia is well recognized, although there are many problems CLD patients face, like recurrent pneumonias, tuberculosis, and in this time COVID also. But there are three specific problems uh, which CLD patients suffer, that is hepatopulmonary syndrome, portopulmonary hypertension, and hepatic hydrothorax. I will cover these three problems one by one. To start with hepatopulmonary syndrome. So hepatopulmonary syndrome, HPS, is the most common cause of respiratory insufficiency in patients with CLD. It is characterized by gas exchange abnormalities caused by intrapulmonary vascular dilatations, IPVDs. And it is estimated to occur in 5 to 32% of CLD patients who are transplant candidates. And there is an abnormal oxygenation which is defined by elevated alveolar arterial gradient. And contrary to earlier brief, HPS can be found in acute or chronic liver diseases, portal hypertension without liver diseases, and Wilson's disease, alpha-1 and antitrypsin deficiency, and even in acute liver failures. Presence of HPS increases mortality and impairs quality of life. So this is the brief overview about the recent understanding of the pathogenesis or pathophysiology of hepatopulmonary syndrome. So in the presence of liver disease, there is a hepatic injury, there is a portal hypertension, and there is a hyperdynamic circulation. Because of that hyperdynamic circulation, there is an increased release of endothelin 1, and which acts on the endothelial cells, leading to the increased expression and activity of eNOS, that is nitric oxide synthase, leading to increased release of nitric oxide, which is a vasodilatory gas, leading to vasodilatation and hepatopulmonary syndrome. And there are other pathways also, which is there is a systemic inflammation, and there is a enhanced bacterial translocation from leaky gut, leading to macrophage activation, which also release vascular growth factor, and there is an increased adherence of macrophages to endothelial cells, again leading to endothelial cell proliferation and leading to angiogenesis, with multiple pathways converging onto angiogenesis, vasodilatation, leading to the hepatopulmonary syndromes. Again, in this pictogram, this is the most recent understanding about the pathogenesis of HPS. Now they say that there is a leaky gut in the chronic liver disease patient, which is the initial inciting event. The bacteria get translocated and goes to pulmonary circulation, where they stimulate macrophages to release various chemicals, and there is a increased production of eNOS. So now I would request you to focus on this image. So as this is a normal alveoli, and this is the what happens to alveoli and blood epithelial lining the alveoli in the HPS. So as you can see, there is a in diameter of pulmonary vessels or capillaries in HPS. So there is a diffusion impairment, because oxygen has to diffuse across a thicker vessel. And apart from that, there is, because of vascular neogenesis, there are vessels are formed which bypasses this oxygenation. So there, in this manner, there are multiple mechanisms by which patient can have low oxygen tension. There is a bypass, there is a right to left shunt, and there is a diffusion impairment. Again, in the same picture, normal alveolar capillary is around 8 micrometer, and now we can compare with the RBC diameter, which is around 5 to 6 micron. But in case of HPS, the alveoli are surrounded by the dilated capillaries, which can have diameters up to 500 micron meter. So this, you must remember, this will have bearing in our diagnostic part. So clinical features which are common to most of the chronic liver diseases in these three, that is hepatopulmonary syndrome, portopulmonary hypertension, hepatic hydrothorax, there is a dyspnea. Most of the time dyspnea is insidious, and most of the patients, they are not able to exactly tell the duration of dyspnea. They are spider name-wise. Clubbing could be there. There can be a cyanosis, and there are two specific things which are common to this hepatopulmonary syndrome is orthodeoxia and platypnea, which I will describe in the coming slide. So this is the beautiful hepatology snapshot from Journal of Hepatology. In this hepatopulmonary syndrome, what constitute hepatopulmonary syndrome is, although it is difficult to visualize some things, HPS come on to this HPS diagnosis part. There are three conditions which has to be met. That is, one is liver disease. It could be acute or chronic. And alveolar arterial oxygen gradient that is increased, that is more than 15 millimeter of Hg or more than 20 millimeter of Hg in patients more than 64 years of age, and intrapulmonary vasodilatation. So in the patients, we can found cyanosis, digital clubbing, there can be diffuse telangiectasias. Now coming on to the specific clinical signs which we can find is platypnea, that is worsening of dyspnea when patients move from supine to upright position, and orthodeoxia, that is defined by decrease in PaO2 more than 5% or more than 4 millimeter Hg, moving from supine to upright position. So this is quite a specific finding you can observe in when you encounter a patient of chronic liver disease with ascites or any other patient you found having clubbing. You can have this test done in your OPD itself with a simple pulse oximeter. Have the patient, when most of the time patient comes to your OPD, he is seated, just measure oxygenation in this table. When patient is seated for 4 or 5 minutes, then ask the patient to lie down. Immediately within 5 minutes, the saturation will start rising. It could be between 1, 2, 3% or 5% or much more, but you will notice this increase in oxygen saturation. There are other additional tests which you can request for is pulmonary function test. Although spirometric values could be normal or there could be a restriction, but in the diffusion part, that is DLCO for carbon monoxide, there is a diffusion impairment which is out of proportion to spirometric findings. Suppose if FEV1 is normal, FVC is normal, everything is normal, spirometry, and there is a diffusion impairment is present, that is again should arise suspicion for hepatopulmonary syndrome. Chest imaging, you can go for chest X-ray or CT chest. Non-specifically, it can show the increased bronchovascular markings in chest X-ray, and in the CT scan can show this diffuse blood vessels, sometimes bunches, sometimes diffusely, which you are not able to differentiate. It would present like an interstitial picture. Specifically, the lung perfusion scan you can ask for, which can quantitate the shunt fraction. Actually, there is we inject with this we call as an MMA scan. We inject micro aggregated albumin, that is radio labeled, into this circulation, and these spheres cannot pass through the normal vessels of 8 to 10 micrometer diameter, but in the presence of HPS and dilated vessel, it passes, and there is uptake in the brain and other organs. More than 6% is defined as abnormal. So coming on to the severity classification based on the PaO2 and AAPO2 gradient. So it can be classified into mild HPS, moderate HPS, severe HPS, and very severe HPS. In all these conditions, the one thing which is fixed is A gradient should be more than 15, and for more than 64 age, it should be more than 20. If it is more than PaO2 is more than 80, it is mild. For moderate, 60 to 80. Severe, when it is 60 to 50 and less than 50, it's very severe. So again, screening and investigative methods used in HPS is pulse oximetry. It is very simple, cheap, and easily available. Less than 96% saturation. It should arise suspicion of HPS. Again, in the chest radiograph, there is increased bronchoscopal markings. Lung function test, I have already told that there is a isolated diffusion impairment should arise suspicion specifically for HPS. Arterial blood gas analysis is available in most of the hospitals. So now, which another commonly performed test, which is definitely required for diagnosis, is this is bubble test or contrast echocardiography. In this test, we inject 10 ml of agitated saline. You all persons can do, those who are familiar with the echo can do it quantitatively in your clinics. Just have a agitated saline with 9 ml of normal saline and 1 ml of air agitated, injected in cubital vein, and then look for appearance in the right heart and left heart. I will come to this point, how to look for this intrapulmonary shunt via echo. Again, technetium labeled microaggregated albumin scan can also differentiate, can also ascertain this intrapulmonary shunt, but it is costly and exposure of radio isotope is there. So now I would like to show the X-ray findings of there are actually two types of HPS. Type 1, in which there is a diffuse telangiectasias in the lungs, and there is a diffuse pulmonary vessel dilatation. This is type 1, and this is type 2, in which there are localized dilatation, in which there is a shunting is directly right left shunting. Large shunts are there, so which will have bearing in the treatment. You can have coil embolizations of large shunts. Now this is the chest radiograph of a 8-year-old patient from our institute only. This boy was having biliary atresia, and at such age he was having severe shunting, and now in the X-ray you can see it is not normal, neither it is showing any definite pneumonia patches, but ill-defined reticular alveolar shadows are there, which are likely suggestive of this pulmonary vascular abnormalities or arteriovenous shuntings. Now coming on to this contrast, saline contrast echo. Please now pay attention to this echo video. In this video, I already said agitated saline is injected into the cubital vein through a tri-way cannula, and we look for the appearance of contrast. First, it will appear in the right atrium, then right ventricle, and through the pulmonary circulation to the left side of heart if they are abnormal vessels. Otherwise, it should not appear. So now I should start. So just have this video. Initially, the contrast is on the right side atrium and then ventricle. And now in the slow motion, just appreciate a contrast appearing in the right atrium, then right ventricle. And now at the fourth beat, it is coming to the left side of heart, left atrium, and filling in the left ventricle. So now here is the catch. If the contrast is appearing within 3 beats, then the shunting could be at the level of heart itself. There could be interarterial septal defect or ventricular septal defect. But if it is after 3 or 4 beats, then it is definitely suggestive of intrapulmonary shunting rather than intracardiac shunting. Treatment and prognosis. The promising pharmaceutical treatments targeting specific pathogenetic pathways are still lacking. Liver transplant constitutes for the moment the only effective treatment that modifies the natural history of HPS. So most of the, even after having severe HPS, most of the patients will have reversal of HPS after transplant, 5 or 6 months of transplant, after post-transplant. So patients with PaO2 less than 60 millimeter of Hg should be evaluated for liver transplant, and patients with HPS and severe hypoxemia should be prioritized for liver transplant. So they are provided this mild exception. Sometimes we hear about that mild exception is given for certain conditions. So coming up to the recommendations of ESL clinical practice guidelines, patient with HPS and PaO2 of less than 60 millimeter Hg. So now I would like to again suggest that this PaO2 of 60 millimeter Hg is around 90 or 92% of saturation it correlates to should be evaluated for LT, since it is only effective treatment for HPS. Since severe hypoxemia is associated with increased liver transplant mortality, and ABG analysis should be carried out every 6 months in order to facilitate prioritization. Suppose if you are monitoring a patient in your clinic or hospitals, and your patient's oxygen is saturation is coming down to 92, 94, so then you should refer such a patient to specialized hepatology hospitals. So now there are other therapies also. For the time being, you can give a trial of these therapies, which are although not based on the robust randomized control trials, but about the garlic. Now about this study is showing that group 1 was given garlic 1.5 gram per day. That is, even it is present in the market in the form of granules, you can give 2 granules 3 times a day. In the group 1 patient was given garlic. The initial PO2 are comparable in group 1 and group 2. In follow-up 9 months, the PO2 in the garlic arm is 83.05 plus minus 5.88, while in the non-treatment arm it is 68. And about the PO2 also, there is an improvement in the alveolar arterial gradient, that is 21 in the treated arm, and the gradient is 29, that is high in the non-treatment arm. Again, the one more therapy which we commonly use, although again it is not robustly proven, is the pentoxifylline, which targets the angiogenic signaling pathways and HPS. This is CBDL is common bile duct ligation model, which is we utilize in the mice. So this is we have given in this study, the pentoxifylline was given to the mice, and in CBDL mice, and in one group it was not given. So in those, this a slide is showing the vascular markers, immunohistochemistry about this von Willebrand factor PCNA, that is nuclear antigen, microvessel count ED1, which is a marker of macrophage activation, and alveolar arterial gradient. These all parameters are better in the pentoxifylline group. So the dose of pentoxifylline is usual dose is 400 milligram 3 times a day, but to start with for initial 2 weeks, because of the adverse GI side effects like vomiting and gastritis, you can start with 400 milligram twice a day, and then after evaluation you can increase later to 3 times a day. But one more thing you have to observe is many of these patients are having COPD or asthma and should be on theophylline or other methylxanthine. So there should not be 2 methylxanthine. So theophylline should be avoided. Now coming on to portopulmonary hypertension. Portopulmonary hypertension is characterized by portopulmonary hypertension is characterized by development of pulmonary arterial hypertension in the setting of portal hypertension, and it is present in 5 to 10% of cirrhosis patients evaluated for liver transplant. Screening of portopulmonary hypertension in cirrhosis patients eligible for LT is critical, since severe POH is the contraindication for liver transplant. Patients with moderate portopulmonary hypertension who responds adequately to medical therapy may benefit from liver transplant. So portopulmonary hypertension is again a rare complication of end-stage liver disease. It is defined as pulmonary arterial hypertension in the setting of portal hypertension with or without liver disease, and is included in the group 1 of PH classification. Initially it was put in the miscellaneous group 5, but now put in the group 1 because of similar pathophysiology. And it is characterized by elevated pulmonary arterial pressures, increased pulmonary vascular resistance as a result of remodeling process in pulmonary vasculature. So diagnostic criteria for portopulmonary hypertension: mean pulmonary arterial pressure, it should be more than 25 mm of Hg. Pulmonary vascular resistance should be more than 240 dynes centimeter raised to power minus 5, and pulmonary capillary wedge pressure should be less than 15. Classification of severity. Based on mean pulmonary arterial pressure, portopulmonary hypertension is graded as mild, moderate, and severe. Mild being more than 25, less than 35, moderate more than 35, less than 45, and severe more than 45 mmHg. Pathophysiology. So portopulmonary hypertension is thought to arise from limited blood flow in the pulmonary arterial circulation because of vasoconstriction. So because of chronic liver disease, numerous factors are thought to be responsible for these changes. So because of there is a abnormal liver functions, which because normal liver is supposed to clear out many mediators and thought to secrete many mediators, that function is drained. So there is an imbalance of vasoconstrictive and vasodilatory mediators, and in the liver vascular bed, it causes changes in endogenous vasoregulators. There is an increased endothelin, reduced prostacyclin synthase from pulmonary endothelial cells, proliferation of smooth muscle cells, endothelial cell activation. So which again points to the type 1 of this PH, and platelet because of platelet aggregation. So natural history and prognosis, the incidence is around 3 to 10%. They are independent risk factors for the portopulmonary hypertension. Females are 3 times more likely to have portopulmonary hypertension, pre-existing autoimmune conditions, genetic variations in estradiol levels, and moderate to severe portal hypertension. Presence of portosystemic shunts, all are independent. There is no clear association between severity of liver disease or portal hypertension in the development of portopulmonary hypertension. Survival rate at 1 year are 35 to 46% without specific treatment. And it has worse outcome as compared to idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, that is 40% survival at 5 years in portopulmonary hypertension as compared to 64% in idiopathic pulmonary hypertension. Medical treatment. The evidence-based base for pharmacological therapies in portopulmonary hypertension is limited. Most data is extrapolated from studies in pulmonary arterial hypertension and not related to liver disease. So medical treatment, endothelin receptor antagonist. So bosentan has been shown to improve pulmonary artery hemodynamics, exercise intolerance in patients with portopulmonary hypertension, survival rates up to 89% at 3 years. Again, this is from retrospective data. The dose of bosentan is 62.5 milligram twice a day. There is a limited data on the use of ambrisentan and macitentan, although in our place now, because of easier dosing and lesser side effect, lesser hepatic impairment, ambrisentan is preferred over bosentan. The dose is to start with 5 milligram OD to 10 milligram OD for ambrisentan and macitentan. So FDA places a caution on this class of drugs in patients with advanced liver dysfunction because of they themselves can cause hepatic impairment. About the phosphodiesterase subtype 5 inhibitors. Blockade of phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitors facilitate the vasodilatory effects of nitric oxide through reduced metabolism of cyclic guanosine monophosphate. Sildenafil improves functional capacity and increased cardiac output. So dose of sildenafil is usual doses 20 milligram TDS, but the caution is again advised to start in the starting dose. You can start with 10 or 20 milligram of sildenafil OD. To now, if patient starts tolerating the doses without having hypotension or other side effects, you can increase to 20 mg TDS. Sildenafil can precipitate variceal bleeding also, and caution is advised in bleeders. Medical treatment, prostacyclin analogs that are iloprost, epoprostenol. Prostacyclin analogs have many potential benefits. That is, they have direct vasodilatory action, reduced vascular smooth muscle proliferation. They are antithrombotic, improved pulmonary hemodynamics with IV epoprostenol is shown in case series. And potential for improved 5-year survival has been shown, 70% versus 40% in non-treated. Recommended in lower doses to reduce development of thrombocytopenia and splenomegaly. So this lower doses are as compared to idiopathic pulmonary hypertension. Other studies showing inhaled iloprost also report short-term hemodynamic benefits, but although these inhaled prostacyclin analogs probably are not yet available in India. Impact of management of other complications of cirrhosis. So caution should be exercised when considering tips in the placement. Because of the tips, there is an increased return of blood to the right ventricle, and there is an anticipated increase in right ventricular filling pressures, and cardiac output may precipitate marked increase in pulmonary vascular resistance, right-sided pressure overload, and even frank right heart failure. So moderate portopulmonary hypertension, that is mean pulmonary artery pressure more than 35 and less than 35, is a relative contraindication for TIPS placement and also for liver transplant. Severe portopulmonary hypertension is absolute contraindication for TIPS. So these are again recommendations from EASL guidelines. Screening for portopulmonary hypertension should be done via transthoracic Doppler echocardiography in patients deemed potential recipients for TIPS or liver transplant. And in those with positive tests, right heart catheterization should be performed, but although because of many times patients have very low platelets and deranged and coagulopathy, sometimes it is difficult to go for right heart catheterization. Beta blockers should be stopped and varices managed endoscopic therapies in patient in cases of proven portopulmonary hypertension because of they can further decompensate heart. Therapies that have been approved for primary pulmonary arterial hypertension may have benefit in portopulmonary hypertension to improve exercise tolerance and hemodynamics. However, endothelin antagonists should be used with caution, again because of they can cause hepatic impairment on its own. So most of these events and TIPS should not be used in patients with portopulmonary hypertension in moderate to severe category. So most of the evidence here is of the 2-1 class, that is randomized control, non-randomized controlled trials, and high quality of evidence. Liver transplant indications, perioperative consideration. If mean pulmonary arterial pressure is less than 35 mmHg and right ventricular function is preserved, LT should be considered. If mean pulmonary arterial pressure is more than 45 mmHg, it should be considered as absolute contraindications. Therapy to lower mean pulmonary arterial pressure and improve right ventricular function should be commenced in patients with in the moderate category of portopulmonary hypertension, and mild exception criteria should be considered in patients with proven portopulmonary hypertension in whom targeted therapy fails to decrease mean pulmonary artery pressure less than 35 mmHg, that is to the mild category, but does facilitate normalization of pulmonary vascular resistance. Proven portopulmonary hypertension of moderate severity in whom targeted pressures, there is a reactivity, targeted pressures are bring down to less than 35. So again, this is a comparison between HPS and portopulmonary hypertension. The clinical issues, arterial hypoxemia is there in HPS, and in portopulmonary hypertension, there is a pulmonary arterial hypertension. Diagnostic criteria is PO2 less than 80 mmHg. In portopulmonary hypertension, it is mean pulmonary arterial pressure that is more than 25 and pulmonary vascular resistance more than 3 Woods unit. Liver disease usually in the cirrhosis, and in portopulmonary hypertension there is always requirement of portal hypertension preceding to portopulmonary hypertension. There is no such requirement for the development of HPS. Frequency, severity, there is a poor correlation with liver disease in both. The growth frequency is 5 to 32% in HPS and 5 to 10% in portopulmonary hypertension. So HPS is as compared to portopulmonary hypertension. The medical treatment is via supplemental oxygen in HPS group and medications in portopulmonary hypertension. 5-year survival again is low in both the groups. It is 23% in HPS and 4 to 14% in portopulmonary hypertension. Even with therapies, it is only up to 40%. So liver transplant is the indication. I have already told in HPS, it is with severe HPS, mild exception is granted. Priority is given to for liver transplantation to the HPS patient with the same mild scoring, while it is a contraindication in the moderate to severe PH. So treatment outcomes, there is a complete resolution with liver transplant, but it is unpredictable in the portopulmonary hypertension. That is, if it is moderate to severe, there is a resolution with LT is not that as that of HPS. Now coming on to hepatic hydrothorax. Hepatic hydrothorax is seen 5 to 10% of cirrhotic patients. It is defined by accumulation of transudate, that is transudative pleural fluid in the absence of cardiac, pulmonary, or pleural disease. Formation secondary to small diaphragmatic defects, more often located on the right side, through which ascites move into pleural space because of negative intrathoracic pressure. So it is assumed that because of negative pressure in the thoracic cavity or pleural cavity, the fluid continuously seeps out to the pleural cavity, leading to the formation of hepatic hydrothorax. Large hepatic hydrothorax or collection of large fluid in pleural cavity per se can lead to respiratory failures, can be complicated by other bacterial infections, and it is also associated with poor prognosis with a median survival of 8 to 12 months. The presenting symptoms are again insidious breathlessness and occasional cough without expectoration. Sometimes patients with large effusions only tell that they have symptoms of only 10 to 12 days or maximum 1 month. Diagnosis of hepatic hydrothorax. So once pleural effusion has been ascertained by chest X-rays, ultrasound, primary pleural diseases should be excluded, or even cardiopulmonary reasons for collection of pleural fluid should be ruled out by standard clinical approaches. So that is diagnostic thoracentesis is required to rule out bacterial infections. Presence and extent of diaphragmatic defect can be assessed indirectly by radioisotope techniques or directly by MRI or color Doppler ultrasonography. So what is the need for this diaphragmatic defect mapping is because sometimes diaphragmatic defects are very large, and this leads to refractory hepatic hydrothorax and is amenable to surgical correction. So pleural fluid analysis. So this is this similar to Light's criteria. So diagnostic criteria for hepatic hydrothorax, pleural fluid analysis. Serum to pleural fluid albumin gradient, that is SPAG, should be more than, it is like SAG, it should be more than 1.1. Pleural fluid protein should be, total protein should be less than 2.5 gram per dl, or pleural fluid to serum protein levels should be less than 0.5. Ratio of lactate dehydrogenase in pleural fluid and serum should be less than 0.6. Polymorphonuclear count, that is neutrophil, should be less than 215 in normal pleural fluid. In the presence of spontaneous bacterial pleuritis, PMNs can get raised more than 250 per cubic millimeter with a positive pleural culture. This is one criteria. Another is PMN alone more than 50, even in the absence of positive pleural cultures, defines as SBP. Spontaneous bacterial pleuritis. Absence of pneumonia or contiguous infection on chest imaging is also required, because in the presence of pneumonia, there can be an early parapneumonic effusion. So this is again a X-ray image. Although X-ray image is never suggestive that whether it is a hepatic hydrothorax, whether it is a complicated hepatic hydrothorax or any other effusion. So in this X-ray, you can see a normal, uniformly hazy right-sided mid-zone and lower zone lung fields. There is a contralateral mediastinal shift, but now you can appreciate on the left side, the lung is completely normal. Even in the upper part, the lung doesn't seem to have any parenchymal involvement. So this is the scenario. The CT scan from the same patient I will show. Now I have shown the mediastinal window deliberately to show the extent of effusion. So in the same patient, the effusion, see now the lung part is only this black one. There is a large collection. It is at the level of aortic arch. You can see there is a large collection. It is not showing any debris or any other material. So now see the chest X-ray, this and CT scan of the same patient on the same day. Right, left side of chest is apparently normal in the lung windows. There doesn't seems to be any mediastinal lymphadenopathy. So treatment of hepatic hydrothorax, first line management relies on the treatment of ascites, because it is the pathogen. In the pathogenesis part, we believe that the pathogenesis because of the seepage of this ascitic fluid under negative pressure of pleural cavity. So first line of management relies on the treatment of ascites with diuretics and or large volume paracentesis. So to start with, we can give diuretics, lacilecton 20 by 50 twice a day, and the maximum dose is 400 and 120. So even if when it is not able to when it is not able to, it doesn't enhance to that much of dose and ascites is there, probably that is a refractive ascites, or otherwise patient develops side effect, then therapeutic thoracentesis is required to relieve dyspnea. Sometimes to relieve dyspnea, therapeutic thoracentesis is required, even though that pleural fluid is not showing any infection or any other problem. That because in most of the other chest problems, in the absence of CLD, thoracentesis is required. But in this patient, therapeutic thoracentesis is required when there is a large collection and to relieve dyspnea, and that should be. Sometimes you can put pleural catheter to drain it over days instead of instantaneously. You can drain up to 400 ml 3 times a day. Otherwise, for moderate effusion, even a single tab is sufficient. So repeated thoracentesis increases the risk of infections, soft tissue infections, and bleeding. So even repeated thoracentesis is avoided when it is refractory to treatment. Sorry. Whenever indicated and possible, liver transplant represents the ultimate best option for patients with refractory hepatic hydrothorax. TIPS also has been effectively employed as a definitive treatment or bridge to transplant for refractory hepatic hydrothorax, but sometimes TIPS is not feasible because of patient is sometimes having moderate to severe portopulmonary hypertension, and sometimes because of age, patient also cannot undergo liver transplant. In such cases, when there is a refractory hepatic hydrothorax, you can do a fluorodesis for the patient, excluding other infections, and it can be done by talc, povidone, iodine, tetracycline, and doxycycline. But in a recent meta-analysis has shown that the complete response rate after fluorodesis is 72% only. That is also after 2 or 3 cycles of fluorodesis, and the complications rate are very high, up to 82%. In cases when there is a large diaphragmatic defects are detected by imaging, thoracoscopic repair with Marcelin mesh can be done, and it decreases the formation of pleural fluid. Recommendation: cardiopulmonary and primary pleural disease should be ruled out before diagnosing hepatic hydrothorax. Definitely all other secondary causes of collection of pleural fluid should be ruled out. Diuretics and thoracentesis are recommended as first line therapies. Therapeutic thoracentesis is indicated to relieve dyspnea only. In selected patient, TIPS insertion for recurrent symptomatic hepatic hydrothorax is recommended. Fluorodesis can be suggested to the patient with refractory hepatic hydrothorax, not amenable to liver transplant or TIPS correction. Mesh repair for diaphragmatic defect. Again, the level of evidence is by case control studies or non-randomized controlled trials. So about the complicated hepatic hydrothorax, when there is spontaneous bacterial peritonitis or is spontaneous bacterial effusion, that is a spontaneous bacterial infections in pleural cavity. If it is patient is outpatient, community acquired, we can treat that with third generation cephalosporins or piperacillin tazobactam combination. In healthcare associated SBP or SBE, the choice of antibiotics could be area dependent, like nosocomial infections. If high prevalence of MDR organisms or sepsis there, we can choose antibiotic as per our isolates. In nosocomial SBP, the carbapenem alone or daptomycin, vancomycin, or linezolid if high prevalence of MDR gram-positive bacteria. So this is again a brief algorithm about the patient admitted to ICU with hypoxemia. So admission to ICU with dyspnea. Patient is having cyanosis and digital clubbing. Saturation definitely must be low. For sometimes indication of admissions are other, like encephalopathy. If we are able to show platypnea and orthodeoxia, and we can get a arterial blood gas also. Simultaneously, chest imaging are done to rule out other causes, and we can do a echocardiography at bedside. Also, hepatic hydrothorax can be seen in the imaging chest X-ray. So if there are other structural lung diseases like COPD, which is frequent because in the alcoholic CLD patients, so that those can be managed as per their own management. Portopulmonary hypertension, hepatopulmonary syndrome, if severe PO2 is less than 60 mmHg, although sometimes there is no because of the severe portopulmonary hypertension, there is no definitive therapy which can act immediately, but sometimes if inhaled nitric oxide is available, we can be given in portal pulmonary hypertension. This is again diagnostic algorithm for patient with chronic liver disease and dyspnea. A patient with dyspnea and liver disease or portal hypertension exclude other common causes of dyspnea, which are easily seen in the chest X-ray ultrasound. Then patient can be requested for echocardiography if the right ventricular systolic pressure is more than 50, then patient needs right heart catheterization, and then further classification of pulmonary arterial hypertension and further management as on the line of portopulmonary hypertension. If there is no POS, we can reconsider other causes of dyspnea. If the right ventricular systolic pressure is not more than 50, we need to get a contrast enhanced echocardiography, and if their intrapulmonary vascular shunts are defined by echo and PaO2 gradient is more than 15, then HPS is confirmed. And in such type of patient, this recommends the head end is put down, so that can marginally increase oxygenation, because the shunts are present mainly in the lower lobes, and they recommend the head and down position diverts the blood flow to upper lungs where the shunt fraction is low. So pulmonary complication. Now this is again the very brief chart showing about the three pulmonary complications, namely hepatopulmonary syndrome, portopulmonary hypertension, and hepatic hydrothorax, which I have already mentioned. So to conclude, pulmonary complications, HPS, portopulmonary hypertension, and hepatic hydrothorax carry a significant morbidity and mortality. Clinical suspicion is required to make earlier diagnosis. There are multiple medical therapies available for each of these conditions in literature, but most of the treatments are not very much effective. The only effective treatment that alters the clinical prognosis is liver transplant, and such patients with these conditions should be screened and assessed for suitability of liver transplant and referred to higher centers for appropriate further workup. Thank you.